So what I would say, I'm focused on 2022, but with Elon Musk, what I would say is, I welcome support from African Americans. What can I say?
Hello, everyone. It's us again, the American Aboriginals. And I am excited about this presentation, as many of the others, but this one as well, because it's going to define some of the future videos we talk about, but also in response to the last video as well, because I think it's very important to talk about this, particularly as Aboriginals. And the title of this particular video is From Complexion to Culture: Redefining American Aboriginal Identity. And why this is so important to me is because we sometimes equate the color of our skin to a landmass. And I really want to talk about that because I think, particularly for those of us who have traveled and have lived overseas for a while, we understand that it's really, really important to meet people where they are as opposed to where we want them to be. So, as you can see here, the table of contents is starting with the first humans. I'm going to take you guys on a trip around the world to see some beautiful cultures and people who have dark complexion skinned. I'm also going to talk about this strange case of LUZIA, and that will really be a bit mind boggling for many of you. And we're also going to close with final thoughts, recognizing the color line. So, let's dive right into the first humans. And I want to say this in particular, and I know people will try to challenge me on this, but I really want to drive this home that when we talk about dark or we talk about skin color, we have to always remember that we're not necessarily talking about quote unquote black people or necessarily quote unquote African people. And the reason why I say we want to really quantify that, because one of the things I find is that when we look at people from around the world, we automatically call them black. And I'm going to explain to you why you should probably be very careful of saying that. So, of course, the out of Africa theory says that humans left Africa 40 to 60,000 years ago. That has been challenged by scientists and archaeologists and paleontologists around the world. You can refer to our last video where I spoke about that at length. I will also be providing you guys the links to everything in the description so that you can see that for yourselves. Okay, so one of the most ancient people on the planet are the quote unquote African pygmies. And these are said to be the first humans, and they most likely expanded before 130,000 years ago, and certainly before 60,000 years ago, which is really, really mind boggling, of course, because this is a group of people that we tend to be fascinated by, but we also don't always talk about them very often. But I think it's really important to pay homage to the first humans before we dive into this, and the first humans that are still alive and in existence today. And it is estimated that there are between 250,000 and 600,000 pygmies living in the Congo rainforest today. However, the Twa live in open swamp or the desert. And I'm still doing a deep dive on this particular group of people, and it's just so fascinating to me. And of course, as you know, the pygmies are not very tall in stature. They're usually not really taller than 5 feet, and sometimes that's even being generous. But there's so much that's been talked about and written about them. But I just wanted to first acknowledge them in this discussion. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us about that. And we can talk more about the pygmies in another video. So I want to take you guys on a trip around the world and preface this with the fact that, when you travel and you live overseas, you begin to really understand that the world is so much more bigger than the United States. I lived overseas for 3 years and traveled extensively. beyond that. And I lived specifically in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. So I got a chance to see so many and meet so many beautiful people from all over the world. And I really, really loved that experience and will never, ever forget it as long as I live. And it just really also opened my eyes to the world and to, quite frankly, the fact that, I didn't know as much as I thought I knew about the world. So, but I want to talk about this thing called dark and brown skin and really hone in on this because I think it's really, really important that we know that dark skin doesn't necessarily mean African per se. And some people will say, well, oh, we all came from Africa and we all have African descendants. And I want to say, okay, that may be technically true, but I also want to say something. We have to make sure that we look at people from where they are. And I want to make this note before we get started that the individuals depicted in the following pages may trace their lineage to a single Aboriginal mother. However, it's crucial to recognize and respect the diverse array of cultures, ethnicities, and languages among them as it relates to their respective regions and countries. Okay? So here we are in beautiful, beautiful India, Kerala, India. And I know my accent isn't the greatest, so please forgive me if I'm not saying this correctly. But of course, when you see these beautiful women of the Pania community, you automatically say, oh, they have African, heritage and are descended from Africans. Well, I think it's very important that whenever you travel or whenever you go anywhere in the world and you see a dark skinned person, that you first ask them where they are from. Please do not assume they are African because you will get embarrassed and you will get embarrassed. And you will also feel uncomfortable when they begin to educate you about their culture because you made an assumption. But I just wanted to start off by saying that because sometimes when we again see dark skin, we tend to think, oh, that's Africa. But as you probably are very much aware, India is a very, 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 very ancient country, right? And they speak so many languages there. And here's a beautiful, beautiful young lady. She's also from the Pania community. And, you just see her beautiful face. And also, this is an old picture of a group of Panian men and children of Malabar. Again, you see that they clearly are Aboriginal and have Aboriginal features. And then again, we move to Madhya Pradesh and the Umara district. And these are Gandhi women. And again, they are very distinctive in their look, very distinctive culture. And again, I'm not an expert in all cultures, but I'm learning. And I just wanted to at least visually show you what we have going on here around the world. Again, you see more women from Madhya Pradesh, and they are working women. Most of the women in most of these regions in India, there's a great deal of poverty, as we're well aware. And then we move on to Tamil Nadu, and this is a photograph that was taken in 1871. And as you can see, just looking at, I love old photos for this because you see so much richness and so much depth in their faces. And again, it's a really interesting space here where they are. Right. And then, of course, here we are in Thailand. Yes, of course, Thailand. And this is a Satan woman and child. And again, excuse me if I'm butchering names, in the Banduan village in South Thailand. And something to be noted here is that when you see Aboriginal people in these communities and in regions and countries, these are not often the people who are running the country, right? So there has been colonization everywhere, and often the Aboriginal people of those countries are hidden from view. You don't see them very often, and they certainly aren't propped up in popular culture. Okay. And of course, to give you guys a visual representation as to the region, sometimes it's hard to see these places and to recognize these places on the map. But this is South Asia, and I was right here in the UAE, this small country, right there. Um, and as you can see, here's India right next to China. We've got Thailand over here, the country just showed you. There's Cambodia, Vietnam, Philippines. Like, as you can see, there's a lot of um, I won't say commonality, but they are very, very close together. But yet, each of these countries is very, very distinct in their culture, their language, and food and everything. Again, we have a group of men here, Jahai men, I believe I'm saying that correctly, in South Thailand, another province in South Thailand. Again, you see their features are very Aboriginal, they're very dark. And then here we have something quite unique. We have a group of Manchu ladies eating at a table. And as you can see, we have typically seen a very narrow, I won't say just narrow, but we've only seen one image of what a Chinese woman would look like, or a woman from China would look like. And as you can see, the woman on the left is clearly an Aboriginal woman. She's clearly dark, and the young lady sitting next to her as well. But you don't see them in China. You don't see them, right? And again, this is a whole nother video, but this is a really famous picture of Boxer rebels. And you guys have probably heard of the Boxer Rebellion in China. And that's a video I definitely want to focus on, because you're talking about basically poor people saying we've had enough. We've had enough of the oppression. And unfortunately, in this particular photo, these men were probably executed not too long after, due to the uprising. And again, this is another picture you've probably seen before. And these women are actually from Tibet. And this photo was taken around 1903. And one of the really, really just beautiful things about this particular photo is that these women all look incredibly similar because of their hair. But what's fascinating is their hair. It's just so fascinating to see this and to see these beautiful, beautiful Aboriginal women. But again, you don't see very many women of dark hue in these countries. And again, we have Indigenous people in Taipei. Taipei, right? Again, these are villagers. You don't really see them spoken of very often. Many of these countries, they know they exist, but they live their lives and they do their thing. But in terms of what you see every day, if you were to go to these countries, you would definitely see a lighter version of the local culture represented. And again, we have Indigenous Filipinos here. And I actually had a really, I met my first dark-skinned Filipino when I was in Seattle. I was part of a poetry group, and this particular young man, he spoke Spanish, so I naturally thought he was Afro Latina, and he said, "No, I just speak Spanish." He says, "I'm actually from the Philippines." And my mouth dropped because that was my first experience meeting someone with dark hue from the Philippines. And I mean, he was pretty dark. And he gave me a history lesson, right? And he said, "Oh, yes, they definitely hide us. We don't exist, et cetera, et cetera." And so it was just really interesting to hear his story and to really get to know him better, because he educated me a great deal. And gosh, this must have been at least, I don't know, 30 years ago or so. Again, we see more beautiful pictures of Indigenous Filipinos. Again, it's just fascinating because you see all these dark-hued people all over the world. And I'm particularly focusing on South Asia and Asia because we just don't see them. We just don't. These are not the people that are represented around the world, right? And here's another beautiful photo I found of I won't even begin to try to say this particular tribe in Australia, but this is some deep stuff here. And we know that there are many, many Aboriginals in Australia. But again, they're diverse as well. You can't just say Aboriginal Australians. You're talking about there's uh, a great deal of Aboriginal tribes in Australia. And here we have a Fiji woman and a Fiji chief. Isn't this fascinating? It's almost like you're looking at your relatives when you see these photos. Like literally, you are seeing your distant relatives. Just absolutely, absolutely fascinating. Again, we see Indigenous Australians. This is the man on the left is activist William Barak. You can see he's fierce, he's powerful, he's not playing around with anybody. On the right, we see this beautiful South Australian woman. Again, I mean, she looks like someone in my family. This is amazing. So, but when we start talking about Europe, I want to bring your attention to two books that will definitely change your perception of the Aboriginals of Europe. Please read Ancient and Modern Britons and The Negro Rulers of Scotland and the British Isles. Yeah, the Negro Rulers of Scotland and the British Isles. Because you could better believe that you're not going to see, at least particularly when it comes to Negro Rulers of Scotland and British Isles, you're not going to see this history talked about very much in the UK. I was there too. I hung out a lot in London and in Scotland, and this is even before I even read this book, so I had no idea that you had Aboriginal anybody in Europe. So this just goes to show that there's so much of history that is hidden, and if you do not do deep dives and do not read extensively, you're going to walk around just going with the colonist narrative all the time, right? So I want to move on to a really, really interesting case of LUZIA. And this is part of it for me when I talk about skin color and what that means to us and what that means for us around the globe, is that you have to be very mindful that there are some people who really just don't want to talk about it, right? They don't even want to talk about it. That's the past. This is where we are today. Forget about it. But what's really interesting is the intrigue that we find in the world of science. And I don't want to accuse people of erasing us, but they do. They try. And sometimes they're very successful at it. And this case kind of points to some of that. I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, but the situation, the details around this case is really, really interesting. So, LUZIA, and you probably have seen her face before, right? And in 1973, scientists discovered an 11,500-year-old skeleton in a cave at Lagoa Santa in Brazil. Now, they called her the LUZIA woman, and her remains were the oldest human remains found in the Western Hemisphere. The oldest remains, right? So it was an amazing discovery, and it just set everything, to pieces, because now you had something that you can study and you could really say, okay, America, right? So Walter Neves, an anthropologist at the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, suggested that LUZIA's features most strongly resembled those of Australian Aboriginal peoples, right? Now, Walter Neves, he just went with the science and with what he had. And he, along with Richard Neve of the University of Manchester, built a skull morphology based on what they believed her face to look like based on the skull, right? And Richard Neve of Manchester University had an extensive career in doing this. So it wasn't like this was his first time. He had been doing this for a very, very long time, taking skulls and recreating what people looked like based on the evidence that he had in front of him. So this was presented to the world, and everyone was like, "Oh my goodness, this is so amazing!" Right? But and I'll give you guys links to all of the stories and all of the the intrigue around this in the link. There will be links in the description. But I'm going to fast forward to 2018, the National Museum of Brazil. And yes, you guys are seeing a building on fire. And it is the National Museum of Brazil on fire. Just burning, burning, burning. And it was a very tragic fire because it's like the Louvre burning or the Metropolitan Museum burning. It's like a major museum burning here in the United States. It devastating, absolutely devastating. So this is an aerial view of the damage that was created. Now I want to say that the human remains of LUZIA was housed in this museum. It's housed in this museum. Okay? And the museum was the largest natural history museum in Latin America. So you can imagine 20 million specimens destroyed, like over 90% of specimens were destroyed. They managed to save about 2,000 artifacts. 2,000. I mean, saving any is incredible. And 80% of LUZIA's remains were recovered, but they were badly damaged, of course. Now, the picture you see on the left is you had people literally protesting what had happened. And I won't go into detail and spend a lot of time explaining what happened to the fire, but basically the museum was on a hill and they didn't have enough water in the fire hydrants. There's water in the fire hydrants, but it wasn't enough water to contain the fire. And it just continued to burn out of control. So it was a pretty big scandal. And I think that Brazil is still trying to figure out how to live that down. But it was pretty intense because the whole country just couldn't believe it. So, but what is interesting about the case, what makes this so interesting, is 2 months later, in November 2018, a team of 72 scientists from 8 countries contradicted Walter Neves' findings in a study published in the Cell. Right? So, quote, "The genetic results of the new study show categorically that there was no significant connection between the Lagoa Santa people and groups from Africa or Australia." End quote. From Andre Strauss of the Max Planck Institute. So, all of the evidence, all of the work that these scientists had done basically said, look, there's no connection between LUZIA and anyone from Africa or Australia. It's not true. She has no connection. None whatsoever. Yet, right? This is where it gets even more insulting. So what they did was they not only told the world that she has no connection to the Americas, they recreated her skull to the one that you see on the right. Yes. As you can see, it's clearly distinctively different. Isn't that something? So they said, look, not only does she not have any of these quote unquote Negroid features, we're also going to change the image of what her skull now looks like. And because the skull that you see on the left, that also was destroyed. So the only thing that we have left are the photos. Okay. So, yeah, isn't that something? Yeah, that's a rub for me. But here's the twist. Always a twist in the story. On the same day as the Cell article was published, a paper in the journal Science, which is still around, also reported new findings on fossil DNA from the first migrants to the Americas. So it's like there were two competing science experiments going on. They were both writing papers, right, on the same day. But check this out. Among the 15 individuals whose DNA was analyzed, 3 of the Lagoa Santa Fe 5 were found to have some genetic material from Australasia, as suggested by the theory proposed by Neves for the occupation of South America. Huh? Isn't that amazing? So, on one level, you have all these scientists in that big paper saying, no, there's no connection. This fossil has no connection to Africa. Yet the other paper that was published said that there was genetic material that connected Australasia to these particular DNA samples. Isn't this fascinating? Utterly, utterly fascinating, right? So it's like on one level, you're always having scientists competing, not only for position, but also for either preserving or trying to dispute, right, a fact. Maybe it's a fact, maybe it's a theory, right? I just found this case particularly incredible. And the researchers, of course, were unable to explain the origin of this Australasian DNA or how it ended up in only a few of the Lagoa Santa people. And I say, of course, because when you have a particular scientific theory, you have to continually use, you got to go beyond your opinion. You have to look at all the evidence in front of you. And I'm going to present all of these links to these particular scientific findings for you guys so you can read through it yourselves. Utterly fascinating. But I just wanted to share that particular case with you, because when it comes to people connecting the ancient human to America, Africa, whatever country, there's always this, oh no, that couldn't have happened here, right? Because, and I didn't include it in this particular presentation, but you guys were probably aware that some time ago in Britain, they said the first human there was dark. And that caused a complete uproar over in the UK when they said that they called him Cheddar Man was actually dark. And of course, the Brits over there were like, "Are you kidding me?" I won't try to mimic their accent, but yeah, it was a trip. So, but I want to bring my final thoughts to this particular video because I think it's so important that we recognize the color line here, because it's all connected to what we perceive about ourselves. And saying that we are Aboriginal, to me, is actually, I don't want to call it a safe zone, but I actually think that is more representative than saying African, because as I showed you, there's so many people with dark skin all over the world, and you would insult them if you said that they were African. They may even agree with you that they have African descent, but at the same time, they have lived in their countries for centuries and have a very distinctive culture from that of the continent of Africa. So to even say that they're African is disingenuous, and you're not really respecting their culture. You're not respecting their language and respecting where they are in their place at that time. And that's, for instance, that's like, somebody being from New York. They're from New York, right? But you're not going to, just because you feel like they look and seem like they're from Texas, you're going to just call them Texans. No, you're not going to do that. You're going to respect the fact that they're from New York and not Texas, right? And so that is what, I discovered when I was traveling and going places, right? So, and of course, I'm showing you guys this map of the indigenous peoples from all over the world. And I was a little reluctant to show this because this map may not represent all of the indigenous peoples of the world. There's still a lot of people that go uncounted, that don't really get recognized as they should. But in any case, here it is. And of course, the darker the color, that's where most of your quote unquote Aboriginal or Indigenous peoples are. And I'm not necessarily saying that they're dark skinned people, but this is the map of where Indigenous peoples are. And as you can see, they're all over the world, all over the world. And they all have an ancient mother and an ancient father, right? So, but I want to tell you guys another personal story of my time in Dubai, which taught me a lot about, again, not making assumptions about people. I had gone to a dinner party and I was having a really great time. There were so many people from all over the world. It was small and intimate. And I was having this great conversation with a young lady. And, I assumed was African, and yet we were talking. And her English wasn't British and it wasn't quite American. So naturally, I'm thinking, okay, well, where is she from? So eventually I did ask her, I said, where are you from? And she kind of smiled and she said, from here. And I said, you mean the UAE? And she said, yeah. She said, from the UAE. I said, I'm a local. She said, I'm a local. And I said, wow. Because again, the people that are running the country don't look like her. The people that you see all over in Dubai don't look like her. And the first thing she said to me is she says, they hide us, which I thought was incredibly, incredibly fascinating. They hide us. And that is really the crux of it. This is really the crux of what we're experiencing as Aboriginals across the country. They hide us. And whether they hide us physically or they try to recreate another narrative for us or change the history on us, they hide us and they displace us and they put us in various categories, right? That's why I always say American Aboriginal. I say Aboriginal because I'm not going to let you displace me. My people have been in America for centuries. And even though I can probably trace some African ancestry in my tree, my people, quite frankly, haven't known Africa or don't even remember Africa or don't even, never been to Africa forever, right? That's why I always say it's so, so important to start talking about genealogy, because if you don't do that, you're just going to displace yourself and you're going to continually say, oh, well, we're all Africans. Well, if that were really the case, then why don't we all call ourselves Africans, right? So, but I wanted to share with you guys this particular painting that you've probably seen, or this image you've probably seen. And it's the 18th century Costa painting, basically cast, right? And Costa paintings depicted people in New Spain in an idealized social structure from the Spanish point of view, right? And the Spaniards tended to articulate hierarchy in relation to whiteness. And as you can see, there's like, 16, 50, yeah, 16 different categories of race based on who's who. Absolutely fascinating. I'll also provide a link to this image too, so you guys can study this for yourselves. And of course, at the top of the ladder were the European born Spaniards, with people of African descent at the bottom, or Aboriginals. They tend to say Indigenous people rank slightly above those of African descent. But of course, yes, there were Africans that were brought to South America and to Latin America and to Mexico, for sure. But there are also Indigenous people there as well that were dark, right? And the system also recognized and graded mixed race ancestry, which is still happening today, although no one will say it on paper, but that's what they do. They do this all over the world, to the point where people are lightening their skin, right? And the more Spanish ancestors you have, the higher your rank. With more African or Indigenous ancestors, your position would decline. Huh. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Still going on today. That is why I'm talking about color and skin in this particular presentation, right? Because it's not just about Africa, it's about your dark skin, right? Now, I show this particular painting because I want to show how we've gone from dark to light. And we know this, right? We know that a lot of it has been through the mixing of different cultures and skin tones. And it's interesting that this particular painting is called Redemption of Ham. And it's by Modesto Brockles. And it is a well known painting of his. And it depicts a black grandmother, she's on the left, a mulatto mother, and a white father, and their quadroon child. This is how they described, people who were mulatto who were with white fathers or mothers. They don't use the term so much anymore, quadroon. So, but as you can see, this is 3 generations of hypergamy through racial whitening, right? So just wanted to put that out there, show you this imagery so that we are setting a tone for future discussions. Because if you don't set this tone, then we're going to continue having confusion. I think when we talk about the Aboriginal, and particularly the dark Aboriginal, because again, the person who's dark is not the person that you're seeing in many of these governments of the countries I've showed you. It is totally light or fair-skinned people of that particular country that are running it and that are showing that this is what our country now looks like. Forget the dark-skinned, dark-hued Aboriginal. This is who a Filipino is, or this is what a Thai person looks like, or this is what someone from China looks like. But I'm telling you that everyone had an ancient mother and father, and that ancient mother and father was dark. So, again, setting the tone, and I'm going to give you guys a bit of a teaser because I'm working on this video right now about the dark-skinned tribes of California. Yeah. Again, people give me pushback, particularly people from the quote-unquote Native American community who are a bit sensitive about that. But hey, I'm going to call things what it is. No one gets a pass. And even my fellow quote-unquote Black Americans, I want to educate them too, because, we have a caste system within our own space. But in any case, I just wanted to share this with you guys and to, basically say, look, we have to really be real about this, and that if I call myself African American, that's really discounting so much of myself as the Aboriginal. And as I showed you in the clip at the top, yes, I'm referring to the clip at the top, is you saw, Governor DeSantis made a joke about Elon Musk being African American. See, people laugh and they joke about it. They think it's funny because sometimes they don't really take us seriously. But that's another discussion. So in any case, I hope you guys took something away from this particular video and you got something out of it. And it will definitely be setting the tone for so many discussions that we have. Thank you again so much for all of your support and for subscribing to the channel. We so appreciate it. We love the support. And we will be talking to you real soon.